Welcome to the Big Breakfast, and today we're going to talk about serious playfulness and government effectiveness. And I've got a really interesting duo here, Luigi Sacco and Doris Sommer, who have both explored the power of culture and arts for nearly centuries. I mean, a long time. Luigi, I've known for also a long time, let's say 20 years. And I always delight in his clarity, for instance, describing and decoding how culture is moving, what's the timeline, what are the big, deep changes. So he's professor at UILM in Milan, also visiting professor at Harvard. But there's much more to him than that, as you can imagine. I mean, he's advised the EU extensively. He heads the OECD Venice office. Now, Doris, unfortunately, I've only met virtually, and we need to change that immediately. Anyway, she's a professor too at Harvard. And of particular relevance here is she runs the Cultural Agents initiative there and has worked extensively in Latin America. What inspired me to ask them to come onto the Big Breakfast conversation was an article they wrote, long article, called Optimism of the Will. Antonio Gramsci takes in Max Weber. Here they contrast the two, and I'm just simplifying for the sake of argument, that Max Weber, who saw culture obviously to mean shared beliefs and all of that, but he seemed to somehow wage a war on pleasure. Gramsci, by contrast, seemed to be different. He understood culture in its more humanistic, aesthetic sense and so on, about seeing pleasure, innovation, and debate, but importantly, as a trigger for transformational change. So, in their conversation, I hope they're going to explain how this pleasurable, perhaps playful seriousness impacts upon the world and the bureaucracy and all of that. Of course, we all know many examples, Antanus Mockus in Bogota and his clowns, Eddie Rama in Tirana with the massive, colorful buildings, and the movement is really spreading over the world. So, can you two explain how this all works, how you're going to take these ideas forward? Doris, for instance, the cultural agents thing and your cases for culture stuff. Um, so I think it's basically over to you two.
Thank you, Charles, for this great opportunity to have a conversation with Doris. Well, with Doris, we have a long habit of collaboration and dialogue on these topics, and we've always been hopeful that the issues of arts for social change would have taken over at some time the policy agenda. But now it seems that the promising moment is becoming a reality. So the first thing that I move to ask to Doris is, what do you think where we stand now? What is the current situation, the status quo, and the prospects for future action in this regard?
Thank you very much, Pierluigi, for the question. Thank you, Charles, for the opportunity to speak with you and your public. I love the title "Creative Bureaucracies" because you've already promoted the change by convening us around this title. Where we stand now is a very interesting point. In great measure, thanks to your work, Pierluigi, promoting culture as a change of behavior, not only a motive of economic development. And precisely in the new work that you and I are doing with Safer Cities, which is a project of UN Habitat, we're calling attention to participatory arts as necessary for safety, not only for personal wellness, but also for prevention of violence. I'll just mention one detail here that we can catch and really promote as a way forward. The new guidelines for safer cities are user-friendly. They want to demote the importance of police and promote the importance of collaboration in communities. And there's not one mention of the word art or culture in the guidelines, not one. if you search. But all of the illustrations in the pamphlet are about participatory arts. So you and I and several other people in a small group that is working with Safer Cities to create indicators for the behavioral change in your language, for the community safety in theirs, may have an opportunity to push ahead agenda by adding indicators for safety through participatory arts at the UN level. That's one
Well,
place we can intervene. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, I was really gotten up about your reference to safety, because this is clearly one of the issues where generally people tend to think that it's all about, let's say, control. It's all about rationality. It's all about bureaucracy, and of course, also bureaucracy in itself is often seen as the antithesis of pleasure. From this point of view, these are all our issues where, of course, our as human aspect of who we are as human beings with emotions and with feelings should be rather controlled and curbed, and not really leveraged to change the status quo. What we are basically saying is exactly the opposite. And the really interesting, the almost ironic dimension here is that whereas generally there seems to be a transfer of knowledge and best practice from the global north to the global south, what we see happening here is exactly the reverse. We are literally learning from the global south. And I think this is an exciting idea that's also probably a anticipation of more things to change in the next future. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The two examples that Charles mentioned from Bogota, with the administration of Atanus Mockus as mayor, who made participatory art a great part of the healing process of a very damaged city, and Edi Rama. Albania is not exactly in the global south, but it's certainly in the periphery of the developed European West. So I think this is a moment to take stock of what we know and also what we don't, what we should be learning from the global south. I want to make a comment also on Max Weber. One of the ironic and tragic elements of his book on the Protestant ethic is that he imagined, I think, he was writing a warning against eliminating pleasure from our lives. The anhedonic condition will get us into an iron cage, was his warning. And yet people who read this book are on such a hot track to modernize that they're willing to give up that human capacity for delight, for enjoying the world, for caring about it. And so I want to say that maybe we're in a mood now with environmental catastrophe through this instrumentalist thinking that we can reread Weber and feel the warning in his tone. What do you think? And what I'm also eager to know, Pierluigi, what else do you think we should be reading today together?
Well, I think that in a moment like this, there is a real urge to better understand what is also the inner logic of artistic creation processes to foster social change. Because what I'm fearful about is the fact that it's true that some public administrations today are catching up on the idea that, let's say, artistic interventions in the public space can make the difference. But sometimes there is also a rather mechanistic, almost formulaic way of understanding this. Like, okay, let's put some murals here, some street artists there, and this will solve the issue, which is clearly not the case. And from this point of view, and especially in a creative bureaucracy festival, I think that this is particularly important to stress. We should come back to the spirit of Renaissance patronage, because in this particular sense, we have a historical moment where you really have policymakers and heads of government that have a direct dialogue with the artist, trying to understand the psychology of the artist and trying to figure out how to combine creatively their own policy agenda with the actual processes that artists use to generate change, to arouse emotion, and so on and so forth. So, for example, in terms of readings, I think that probably we would have to read a bit more closely, for example, the anthology that Nata Thompson put together to understand what were the pluses and minuses of artistic interventions in the public space, and really getting some knowledge of this. I think that understanding artistic processes could probably become and should probably become an integral part of the background of policymakers working with the public space. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I would like to keep the word artist and policymaker, but mostly artist, very open and very universal. One book that we've seen together, and it's one of my basic guides, is Friedrich Schiller's Letters on the Aesthetic Education of Man. When Charles invites us to talk about play, Schiller noticed that in the terror of the French Revolution, where he was in crisis because he had always been a revolutionary, and this made no sense to him, seeing blood flow in the streets of Paris, he said, what is our response to violence? If it's more violence, we get into something that Foucault would call a spiral. Centuries later. The only effective response to violence, says Schiller, is art, is knowing that we are all artists, that we all have a drive to make art, that part of our human DNA is to have a Spieltrieb. He coined a word, it never existed. And I want to revive that word and use it for creative bureaucracies, use it for participatory arts, because you're absolutely right. The bureaucrats who get the importance of art think they need professionals to lead and to get the right symbol, to get the right work out there, instead of knowing that people have to be engaged as art makers in order to participate in a city. So I think that's where we are. What do you think?
Yes, and I think that today is probably also the moment to revive the prophetic lesson of visionary artists like Joseph Beuys, because what
Yes.
Beuys had in mind from the very beginning was this. When Beuys said everyone is an artist, and understood his own work as social sculpture. And this was, the 60s and the 70s, a moment in which, of course, this kind of perspective was not even in the making. So I think that this kind of visionary perspectives are exactly the reason why we need artists so bitterly, because their capacity to anticipate this kind of trends, but also in some sense to catch what are the pressing questions for people. In a moment in which, of course, art had a completely different meaning than today, the idea of inviting everybody to participate in the artistic process, and this was way before, for example, the advent of the digital society, where we really have the tools if we want to create all kind of content that we can dream of, and freely and with professional standards, and to distribute it to whoever we like. In a moment like this, in a sense, it's already happening. It's already the case that people are unconsciously acting, if not as artists, certainly as creators of meaning and content. But how to leverage this? I see you're nodding. What do you think about this?
Yeah, no, you and I still have some weaving to do between our thinking, because the way that art is being made now on digital platforms is not necessarily participatory. It doesn't join up. One of the ironies, and we started to talk about this, one of the ironies about this new 3.0 level of culture, which you've been very eloquent about and made very important contributions. One of the ironies is that a pre-capitalist world, a pre-modern world, had participatory art. Before the digital, there were choral dances. There were, every woman was an embroiderer. Every man knew how to carve. Everyone shared variations on a genre. Everyone knew they were an artist. So this is where I think the humanities come in, and not only studies of contemporary work. The humanities enjoy fishing in the past for interesting models. And when I talk about Schiller, Schiller was, of course, the wind behind Beuys. Beuys wouldn't have been able to achieve his rhetoric so efficiently if he hadn't read, like every German schoolboy, Schiller before. So this is also a pitch for refreshing a field that had been central to basic education, the humanities, and now is demoted. Everyone I know in STEM is looking for skills like creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication. These are all the skills that we develop in the humanities without any other purpose but to develop skills. So I want to make a pitch for a long view, now that we're in an Anthropocene where we see we're not the only game in town, and have a long view and really make a loop. As you say, we're thinking about a new Renaissance. Let's see what we can learn from past Renaissances, from the Quattrocento, from the Enlightenment, and from practices worldwide that are pre-capitalist.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, it's absolutely true that for the longest stretch of our cultural history as humanity, we have been in this kind of mode. What we call today grassroots culture was all about that. There was no distinction whatsoever between a specialized figure of the artist and the audience. Everybody was freely collaborating. So again, for an irony on history, we have, in some sense, circled back to that position, but with much bigger possibilities to really involve people. So I totally agree on the fact that at the moment, what we understand as, let's say, the participatory digital ecosystem is really the very, very, very early stage of this. And we have not even learned the basic grammar of this. Today, I would rather say that for people, let's say, these digital platforms are more a platform for ego casting in some sense than for real collaboration, for real participation. So we need to learn this grammar again. And what's the best way to do it? In my opinion, it is about collective problem solving. And this is where creative bureaucracy kicks in again. Because today, of course, problems like making cities more accessible, solving traffic problems, optimizing the social use of water. Just imagine. I mean, all these are possibilities in which unleashing our collective intelligence can really make the difference. And this is where this new participatory culture can really make a change. But from this point of view, we need really the point of view of the artist for leveraging upon these new possibilities. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that I agree very much with what you said at the end. We need the artist, but understanding that we're all artists. So the artist is a general and not a professional category.
Sure.
But I also heard you talk about problem solving through art, and this is an important element of what we do today, and it's part of what's called design thinking. Now, artists who are also theorists, like Luis Kamnitzer, you know him, the Uruguayan, make a very sharp distinction between design thinking and art, because art puts the process ahead of the product. We're not going towards anything in particular. We're developing the world and ourselves and each other through free exploration. It doesn't matter really if we come up with a good product. The real product has been that we have associated. And I wrote you in a note recently that I've just recently come to understand what the concept a work of art means. The work is the product. But because it's of art, art has been the process. So
Absolutely.
If we can think about art as process, we have a way, and this links to another conversation that we've been having intermittently. How do we think about a world post-work? And we're all going to face this. If we don't think about everyone is an artist who is capable and engaged with making things because of the pleasant process and the opportunity to communicate with other people, whether or not what they make is useful, saleable, if we don't value the very process, I think we will face a world that is far less safe than we want, with more depression and more violence than we can imagine right now. So I want to, again, as a humanist, make a pitch for art as process with disinterest rather than a goal.
No, absolutely. Of course, I totally agree. I think that in a sense, we need both, because it's true that we have to rediscover art as a process, because we come from a period of obsessive instrumentalism in which getting results was the obsession of everybody, and especially, of course, policymakers with accountability problems. But clearly, so rediscovering this playfulness, again, going back to Gramsci, of course, is absolutely crucial, not only as a path of a personal liberation in some sense, also from social constraints that today is really afflicting people. And in a post-pandemic world, by the way, this is going to count a lot in terms of human development and psychological well-being. But I think that we need both, in the sense that as we need, let's say, both basic research and applied research, in some sense, we need the process of artistic creation without any further purpose, which is fundamental for our experience as human beings, and design thinking as a way to smartly apply what we have learned from there. But again, there's no contraposition at all. I think that they feed each other, and this is why, in some sense, exactly like in research. I mean, artistic, basic research and applied research feed each other. The point is, as you said, that we need to also to break this stupid distinction between the humanities and the STEMs in this regard, because as we are just arguing now, in some sense, they share the same mental process, because again, like there, on one side, you really have to work on the speculative ideas, and then you have to make things work in a certain way. And so we have the common concern. Go ahead.
So here, I want to pick up a point that Charles mentioned, and I appreciate it because it reminded me that we should announce to our viewers, to administrators, to colleagues, that we're launching a genre of essay called Cases for Culture, because I absolutely agree with you. We need to show the effect of what we're doing, whether or not we're doing design thinking or doing art as free research, right? Because if we can argue, even convince ourselves that the process of art making both delivers important products and a human and social well-being, we need to document this. Humanists, on the one side, have something to offer. On the other side, they have been shy or allergic or somehow reluctant to measure what we do. No one takes a survey to see if an arts intervention made a difference in a city. I don't say no one, but very few of us humanists want to do this. So I would like to issue an invitation to everyone to think about collaborating between humanists and social scientists to produce something that looks like a serious case with an interesting intervention and then real measurement before and after, so we can tweak our processes.
This measurement aspect, of course, is very important, and we must admit that also from the artistic and humanistic point of view, there has been for a very long time a strong prejudice against anything measurable, because there was this idea that this was trivializing the subtlety of, let's say, humanistic concepts. It's very important to stress that there is nothing trivial in measurement. Measurement is just a way to make explicit what we are learning from certain types of experiences, and doing this in ways that can be accountable and transmissible is not diminishing in any way the subtlety of the experience itself. We are simply saying that, like every kind of measurement, it's partial. We are not willing to measure everything. We are not trying to find the solution to the humanities problems in one shot. We are just simply trying to figure out exactly what we learn from one aspect of our experience. So it's very important that it's also a call for action to humanists from this point of view to step out of the comfort zone. because very
Yes.
much humanists tend to judge other people because they are not enough willing to reconsider their prejudices, and humanities is all about this, showing you the world from a different angle. But when we are shown the world from a different angle, we are as prejudiced as the others. So it's
Yes.
extremely important from this point of view. What do you think, Doris?
Yeah, no, and I want to make this a friendly invitation to humanists because I so very much agree with you. A friendly invitation is not only to step up, but to step out because there are colleagues out there. I found you, there are colleagues in the social sciences, people who know how to measure, people who may be interested in the issue of safer cities or of well-being, who don't know yet that they're interested in the humanities, but who would get the point. And we should make collaborations. Humanists are not used to co-publishing. You and I co-published a paper. I hope we co-publish several more. But we don't have to learn all of the skills of a social scientist to be able to collaborate in a case for culture. I think this is a moment for curiosity and humility on both sides because the issues are urgent.
Just
Yeah.
interesting. Oh, sorry, you go, Pierluigi.
No, it was just a quick comment just to say that there is really an exciting space for dialogue from this point of view between humanists and the bureaucracy, because in some sense, it's only a problem of communication and language. But I think we would be surprised of how many things in common are there to start a dialogue like this. So this is why I'm so excited to be part of this really, really interesting festival and movement.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
thanks for that. I mean, what I find interesting really with what you just finally talked about, cases for culture and the evidence building, it's so frustrating at one level because for over the last 30 years, there have been so many fragments of all of this being put together, but somehow it hasn't got to the highest potential level of decision making. The other point I just wanted to make, sort of in conclusion, essentially what you're saying, and perhaps you can just comment finally on this point, is what we need to embed is artistic thinking in the way we operate as a whole, in the way we think, plan, and act, and in order to gain a completely different level of insight, which ultimately, in one way or another, will be effective. Would you agree with that final point?
Doris, last word to you.
Yes, if the question is for me, yes, 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 and I'll just say it also in terms of the frame that Pierluigi has been using about finding a language, finding the overlaps. But I want to, and taking our own directive as thinking like artists, I think we should forge a language. What I love about Schiller, among many things, is that he didn't have the right word, so he made it up. And I'm so happy to be here with a creative bureaucracy festival which encourages us to go ahead and be creative because we know that there are empty spots and we can experiment with filling them in. So you have my real admiration and gratitude, Charles, for this wonderful festival and for having invited us.
Thank you. Pierluigi, a final word perhaps from you?
Yeah, I think that in a moment in which we are looking to reconstruct our societies after this pandemic shock, I think we have a huge, unprecedented opportunity to really start from scratch with a new vision. And keeping art outside this vision in a moment like this would be probably the biggest mistake we can ever make.
Well, look, that's a good one to end on. Let's not make that mistake, is what you're saying. Anyway, thank you both for being here for this big breakfast this morning. And I hope we're all going to physically have real hugs rather than virtual ones. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.